Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Building Minds. As Ian says, we've assembled a panel for you tonight that I hope you're going to enjoy. We have Kari Thompson from Faction. We have Kari Sprostranova from Mace. Hello. We have Steve Kerslake from Construction Sport. And Jack Woodhams from Menfulness. I'm not going to say any more of an introduction than that because I want them to tell you what they do themselves. The framing questions for our conversation tonight are, why is there a mental health crisis in the construction sector, and what can we do about it? Okay, so I think, Jack, I'd like to start over with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Could you tell everybody what it is that you do and your engagement with mental health, please?
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I am from down south, but I actually live in York now, and I set up a charity called Menfulness. It was based following from another charity that I set up called Yorkie Dads. Yorkie Dads was when lots of dads, knackered dads like me, got together, ate bacon and moaned about being exhausted. We also had things like dad and daughter hair schools. We also had Lego clubs. We had all sorts of stuff going on. But as time went on, I noticed that there was a few men struggling with their mental health. And I think because it was a safe space, it wasn't specifically statutory service, mental health services. It was a space where dads just got together. They really felt that they could open up about their struggles. We had walking talks. We had football clubs. We had all sorts of stuff going on. We got an allotment, retro gaming night, N64. We had GoldenEye, the best game in the world, and we had loads of stuff going on. But then a few guys wanted to join that weren't dads, and that kind of perplexed me. And I was like, "Oh, yeah, okay, actually, yeah, come along." Their friends were telling their other friends about it, and then sadly, we lost a close friend of ours, Charlie Dallas Lancaster, and he was an estate agent up in York, and he was Mr. York. He was the big cheese of York. He raised thousands of pounds for York Minds. He was always telling people about mental health, about you've got to talk. It's important that you talk, and nobody knew that he was struggling. And just before lockdown, during lockdown, he was there. He was rallying the troops, going, "We've got this, we've got this." And then suddenly we found out, sadly, that he took his own life, and he just blew everyone's mind. And I keep hearing this stuff all the time. He was the last person I would have expected, and that's ringing in my head. And this year alone, I've got 4 new friends. And I don't want any more of them who have lost sons to suicide. And we've been doing a lot of work with them. We created a poem called One More Day, about getting through the day. And you can do that because sometimes, certainly when you've got suicidal ideation, there's 2 options, isn't there? There's taking your own life, but your life just seems too big to continue. It's just too hard to do, and we just say, one more day, we've got this, and that's usually a turning point. One more day, you can do this. So we've created loads of different things to support guys, and there's 3 main kind of options. So please look at our social media. We're really proud of our social media. Across all the different platforms where people, so if you're lonely late at night, you can see the stuff that's going on. Really positive place. And then we've got all our different activities. So we've got a walk and talk. We've got a talk group as well, which is mind-blowingly impactful. The power of getting together and realising that you are not alone, and reducing that stigma and giving that permission to talk, which the badge does. It's just incredible, and actually, it's more impactful than, for me personally, than a GP or a professional saying. But just some random stranger you sat next to and goes, "I'm sorry, mate, that sounds shit." That hits home because he didn't need to do that, and that's the thing with suicide and suicide prevention, actually the biggest impact, the biggest difference is the strangers. That's what I'm hearing about all the time, because they didn't need to do it, and they didn't need to intervene, but they did, and that impact of that other person is just huge. But I suppose our unique selling point, which we're immensely proud of, and we're all volunteers, none of us are getting paid for this. But when you come and see your idols like Frank Bruno, it's pretty cool. I still remember 1995. Oh my gosh, and a flashing light. That was the biggest sporting moment of my life, and he's on panel with me. Anyway, I digress. So you can see my inner child. But our unique selling point, which we're really proud of, is our counselling. So we have had, in the last year alone, 300 guys in York access our counselling. There's no threshold. So if they ring us, I think it's a big step for a guy to ask for counselling. It's a huge step. And that's enough for us. You don't have to fill in reams of different paperwork. Absolutely not. There's no stigma, because there's 300 other guys talking about it. In fact, it's like top trumps. They're talking about counsellors. They're going, oh, which counsellor do you have? How is that working for you? And as I say, there's no threshold. And the big one is that there's no cost. So that's where all of our fundraising goes. And we're able to make it affordable we use students from York St John and York University as part of their 4th year, 100 hours of placement that they have to do. So it means it's affordable, but most of the time it's free for people. And then that means that the stigma is completely gone. And even though someone that set up a charity specifically about suicide prevention, saying that word is really tough for me to do. And I think it's tough for all of us. But giving you some hope, 30 years ago, we've really struggled with talking about cancer. And I'm now delivering workshops with construction students over at York College. And incredible, their knowledge on mental health. And York College this year alone lost 4 students to a suicide, all 16-year-olds, all apprenticeships, all in the construction industry. So if we don't talk about it, if we don't mention the word suicide tonight, it means it's not real. It's just like anxiety. It's just like counselling. The only way we can prevent it is actually saying, what are we dealing with? We are dealing with something that is not just the construction industry, it's across the board. And the biggest issue is the stigma. So that's me, and I've gone off. No,
that's why I checked. No, I think that's. I'm glad that you've raised the issue of the S word of suicide. I think it's something that probably, if I insensitively ask for a show of hands, probably everyone in this room has been affected by it, either indirectly or directly. I certainly know several of my colleagues have been. Sorry, very dry throat. So I'm going to move swiftly on. To Steve. Steve, could you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yes, my name's Steve Kerslake. I'm the founder of what is Construction and Sport. We're a charity set up in the construction industry to provide sporting opportunities for construction workers to ultimately enjoy themselves and give them a reason, similar to Sandwich, finding a bit of room to literally let off some steam, and address the mental health issues in the construction sector. But it all stemmed from my personal story. Goes back to 2008. I was caught up in a sulfuric acid attack out in Essex, far east from here. That led on to what was diagnosed as post-traumatic stress. I went through a number of years working still in the construction world, but wasn't part of the military, so I thought PTSD wasn't a thing. I didn't really warrant it. So I kept it to myself and just worked. And then I discovered 2 fine ways of getting through PTSD, and that was to drink as much as I could or just work as much as I could. And both of those things I've done brilliantly at, and some say not too good at. But that ended up going to a position where my body failed on me. I ended up losing my stomach in the end. I had ulcerative colitis. And I never realised at the time the link between the stomach and the brain. And then I kind of went on a taught the story. I come out of school like any good ground worker with absolutely nothing. And then I went on this educational route of listening to podcast after podcast after podcast of trying to understand what this thing in my stomach was. And it turns out that, your brain offsets all trauma or anything like that to your stomach, and that's why we get anxiety, the butterflies in the stomach. And we always say it now, but we used to play a lot of rugby. We used to always come the nervous shits. I'm not going to lie, it's just a bit I was just eating, I apologise. But before a rugby match, your stomach just goes into a bit of overwork because your stomach's preparing for it. The things are going on where you're about to go and get your head kicked in for 80 minutes probably. But yes, your stomach goes into it. But then I found all this out just from my own education, and I'm just working across a number of projects. I've realised that none of us are taught anything about this, and I just couldn't really work out why, even not just in the construction world, but even as kids, why we were never brought up to understand how our body reacts with trauma or mental health in general. And in 2016, I put together a team of 6 of us, and it was actually 7 years this week. It popped up online. We walked from Reading to Shenfield across every single train station on the Crossrail route. Whilst we was taking all the taxpayers' money as much as we could, we were grafting out there, walking along, enjoying ourselves, like most Crossrail people did. But yeah, we walked. Then I got every station along the route sponsored, and it went really well. And I got onto this thing that I was with the main contractor at the time, Costains, and then I realised that all the subcontractors, all the supply chain, all the subbies below us, all wanted to be seen in a good light to the main contractor. And I kind of tapped into this idea that, and we done that, and we raised £15,000 in a matter of weeks, literally, for Macmillan at the time, because that was the project's charity. But 2 of the guys we were on the walk with were having some serious issues, and I'd worked with them for 3 or 4 years prior to that, and I didn't have a clue. In the working environment, I would never have known. And they were the tough P-way engineers, the big guys who are shifting ballast all weekend, as tough as they come, covering the guys who turn up to weddings, they've still got oil on their hands and that kind of stuff. Real rough guys, and they're the salt of the earth. But one of it's incredible just what he was going through with his little boy in and out of Great Ormond Street for a number of years, and literally didn't have a clue. And I figured out this walk for 3 days in Crossrail just helped so much, and we all opened up to each other, not because we wanted to open up, just because we were so bored of each other. We had nothing else to talk about, that you end up just spilling everything, and you're knackered, your body's fatigued, and it was brilliant. And from that day, I realised there's more to this. And then I was working in the freelance world, so I went across most main contractors, in the kind of infrastructure side of things, Crossrail, tapped a bit on HS2, a lot of highways work. And it was great. But every job I went to, I always set up a different event, 5-a-side football or another walk or one of these things. And everybody just kept on taking to it. And I was hearing more and more stories. And then from that day, I just thought, this needs to go further now. And I had a senior director at Kiers who literally said that you're onto something. I don't know what it is, but just go with it. And to this day, we're chipping away now. We fortunately had a programme with BBC One last year, what kind of trajected us again. But I'm really trying to... I come across, as we carried a chat last week, I can come across quite negative towards the industry, but I'm so negative towards it because I'm so passionate about it. So there's something that has always played havoc in my head, and we've mentioned it, and it's been the best one for conversations this year, but it's riddles and how riddles are reported. And I understand, obviously, there's a lot of technicalities to it, but there's no investigations to suicides in construction under riddle. So 507 people took their own lives in 2021. Not one of them was investigated under a riddle. It gets passed to a coroner. And okay, that's the way it works. And the HSC, I wrote to them and they come back with it. It's on their website. Suicide is not an investigative procedure for the HSC. And it's not, I get that now and I understood that it's more of a thing. They need to be funded, right, for something to happen. But in my head, I can't logically, as a groundwork, again, with my morals and hopefully in the right place, but there's 507 people who took their own life, and we've not lifted the bonnet on one of those people to find out what was going on. And I know there's a lot of personal circumstances to that, but I guarantee we can learn a thing or two if you look at the working environment these people work in, and you see that in the construction world.
Well, that's something I hope that we can dig into in the conversation.
Yeah,
great. Thank you, Steve. Kari, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, thank you. It's really hard following up after Jack and Steve, though, so I'll do my best. I'm Kari Sprostranova. I'm the Health, Safety, Wellbeing Director for Mace Construct. I've been in the industry for about 8-9 years, and prior to that, I worked for the Health and Safety Executive as an inspector and principal inspector for them. So I guess I've seen the industry from different dynamics. I have experiences, as Jack said, in the room, personal, family, mental health, suicide, and friends, as well as trying to understand and investigate as best we can where something happens in the workplace. It might not be riddle reportable, but that doesn't mean that as an employer or as a principal contractor, we don't feel that we have a duty to look at that, and very much looking at that. I've been doing health and safety for a very long time. And I think it's really important that we moved much more towards the health agenda. We've been talking for a while now about shouting safety and whispering health. I think we're getting there, our voice is getting louder, but there's so much still to do, and I'm really passionate about being part of something like this and working with the industry. I'm lucky enough to work with a small group of people who are now supporting the Construction Leadership Council. They put out a note a couple of weeks ago about a campaign that's coming in 2024, and I'm really pleased to be part of driving that forward. And if anyone's got any ideas or thoughts about how we can really make that industry bespoke, we'd love to listen to that tonight, and of course continue working with your panel.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Okay, Kara, on to you.
Yes, very hard to follow this group, but thank you for having me. It's been great to get to know these guys a little bit more through our preparations. So Kari Thompson, I'm a project manager from Australia. I moved over here nearly 12 years ago for a 2-year working holiday, but fell in love with the built environment, particularly in London, and haven't looked back since. My company, we're a small founded project management firm, but extending from Australia. There's a lot of, I think, good practices in Australia, in the industry, that I think we can learn from here in the UK. So I'm keen to definitely pull that forward. Over the years, certainly the last few years, with all the pressures, particularly around finances, we've seen a growing disparity from basically ultimate end client, so where the funds come from, all the way through the professional team, main contractor, supply chain, and onto site. And I think the task at hand, which I know we're going to talk about, is huge. Kind of know you can only control the controllables, so what can we do in our role? And I think particularly as project managers, we find we sit in between the kind of end money and then the rest of the team, and making sure simple things like getting paid on time, which doesn't happen that often, through the entire supply chain, can make a difference. I know we're going to talk about that, but you know, I think we've all had a lot of experience in a range of matters, all mental health, and it's really great to be able to be talking about it. And the more we talk about it, I think the more change we'll enact and see throughout. So.
Fantastic, thank you. Yes, it is very important to talk about it, and I'm glad that we've got that statistic out of the gate first, the 507 last year. It's an appalling statistic. I think what it neatly summarises the crisis, maybe oversimplifies it as well, because I think that not only are there death by suicides, but there are significant depressions and you know, long-term mental health issues that, as you pointed out, can also have physical ramifications. And so if that is just the tip of the iceberg, then there's probably a lot more going on as well. So we've got a picture of what the crisis is like. I suppose now we should investigate the whys. Kara, you mentioned late payment, and I think this is something that I hadn't heard. I'm not an industry insider, but perhaps you'd like to sort of talk about the impact of that.
Mm-hmm. So I think when you look at the stats, like project manager, I love my numbers. I think in 2020, the industry had 19% late payments, and then in 2021, that jumped to 53%. There were only 2 other industries that hit slightly above that, but the construction industry had the highest jump in that year, which, you know, I just think is quite unacceptable, and that's through the entire supply chain. You then look further into the stats, and I think 2023, when you look at the top 3 stresses in the subconsultant market, it's basically number 1, cost of living crisis. Second was the cost of materials. And then the third was finance. And I'm sure everyone in this room, myself, you know, looks at the bank account now at the end of the month, and it looks certainly different to what it did 6 months ago, a year ago, with everything going on. But late payments, I think, is just something that's really unacceptable. It puts a pressure on, you know, particularly the supply chain. It's easy for me to say I come from background of working for corporates and everything works, your benefits get paid, you never get a missed payment. But it is fascinating, even now, seeing how, you know, you get a phone call at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning from your demo contractor saying, we haven't been paid, you know, and the pressure that puts on, you know, not just the management teams, but all of those workers that got to, you know, put food on the table, feed the kids, pay the bills. I think it's really quite damning.
Yeah, and presumably that can be a trigger for drastic action. Kari, can I bring you in here? So the late payments obviously is an issue. Is there anything that you'd like to add to the late payments as a kind of for people to consider as a pressure on people who are already kind of feeling stretched by the financial situation? What else kind of contributes to this mental health crisis?
I mean, it's a really big challenge, and I'm really pleased to say that obviously through Build UK there's a lot of work on making, kind of standing out the information about who's paying on time, because we recognise that is a challenge for the industry. There's been a recent report, actually, the Causeway report, which looked specifically at what they thought the issues were. And the number one stressor that has come out of the top is about irregular and long working hours, and the kind of challenge of working in that project environment where we set really tight deadlines and they're driven. We're just about to come up to the Christmas period. For anyone who's working in this industry, they'll know the pressure of people wanting their projects completed as we deadline towards the end of the year. So that's a big stressor, plus the financial challenge. And I try and explain that to people and say, especially in our environment, I get my salary every month. Very fortunate to do so. If it doesn't come on the day I'm expecting it, I think about what that impact is for me and my family. And yet some of our subcontractors in the industry would go days or weeks not knowing when that payment is coming. Imagine the stress that must be. 3 months, somebody just said, and the stress of that is almost inconceivable, isn't it? It's not even that it's late, it's that we don't know when or if we're going to get it. And that's a real challenge. And I think we've really got to look at that. And I think then we've also got to look at the other elements about culture in our industry. We've talked about how we get people to speak up, and it's okay not to be okay, and that piece. And we've got to kind of look at it from all angles. How do we prevent the stress? And then how do we deal with it in the event that people are suffering? And it's almost that layered approach as an industry. And it's a challenge because there isn't always one piece, but I think we've got enough information now as an industry to show what the scale of the challenge is. And it's just dealing with that.
Just on that as well, as I said, we speak to a lot of businesses, I personally speak to a lot of companies, and they will say, literally, I say, what are you doing for the guys and the girls who work in your workforce? And they say, we do everything for their mental health, we make sure they get paid. That's literally, and we can't do anything else for them because they're too busy. The guys on the ground don't want to be taken out for a fancy day out if they know their payment's going to be late. They'd rather the boss stays in the office and make sure they're paid. So there's so many companies, we've seen it more in the last year of companies like, we can't afford to be having days of team building or doing activities with people because we're chasing money just to pay those people. So, yeah, you see the stresses again tighter and tighter and everything. And we're the same. As well as this, I've got the charity side. I also run a groundworks company as well. Fingers crossed, 12 o'clock tonight, I might get paid tonight, but I don't get. I literally every time it's delayed. It's supposed to be on decent payment terms, but yeah, who knows? Christmas might get delayed. I'm sure it won't. But
right, and the people who are making these decisions are getting regularly paid, so they're disconnected from this.
Any QSs in the room? None. I don't believe that.
So I suppose it's about making this visible, making this disconnect visible, and making this the suffering that people are going through visible.
Yeah, 100%. It rolls downhill, doesn't it? Literally, and stuff. And you think the companies at the bottom can't sustain that, and that's why you see so much. I think a few months ago, it was on 4,500 companies have collapsed in the construction industry. That was, I think, mid-year this year, wasn't it? I've not seen an update one, but those delays, the people at the bottom who are literally your one-man bands or your father and son businesses, family businesses, they can't sustain that, and they're gone. They're gone, are they? I saw the massive losses, isn't it? 6. Yeah, they're gone. Yeah.
There's just no consequences to late payments. So in Australia, I think the stats are like 2% late payments. You get barred, you get charged. There's so many consequences, and I think that's why we're looking at setting up a couple of committees to try and lobby to change the Payments Act, where there is actually consequences if it's not paid. And a lot of the time, the funds are available. Act directly for most of the funds or clients direct, and it might be processed out of Luxembourg, for example, but the funds are there. They just don't. You 2 days are missed here, then 2 days are missed there, and that down the chain adds up.
As well as when you look at it, because I know business, we've heard stories of business owners, but there's business owners along that route who have got to pay companies, are good, honest people who can't live with the fact that they've not paid someone, and that is enough for them to go, I can't handle this, and sign out sort of thing. And that's pretty much, we see it, we've heard it, it's just kind of, it makes honest people dishonest and they can't live with it.
So it's a political problem as well as anything else?
Yeah, 100%. I spoke to Kara previously to this, and we've been speaking a bit this year about how the Australians do it. It's very much, you know, obviously Kara knows it more in detail, but there's heavy penalties to companies that don't do it, and it's a heavy penalty, isn't it? You said that doubles it or whatever, but because it's heavy, people pay on time, believe it or not. Yeah, so, and that will just echo through the chain then, won't it? I like to think.
Jack, bring you in here for a minute. It's we've talked a little bit about the political aspect of things. We've talked a little bit about the economic pressures. The makeup of the workforce in construction, is that a sort of a factor in a sort of, or is it purely environmental conditions that lead to people to sort of have mental health issues, or are there other factors at play in that? Sorry, that was a terribly worded question. What I'm saying is, I think I had a conversation with you, Steve, earlier, and you said something that really struck me. You said that quite a lot of people who come into construction sometimes are coming from particularly dark places. So there might be ex-forces, they might be battling PTSD, they might have been incarcerated for a time, or they might have, you know, they might not have progressed academically through the channels, you know, that other people had due to opportunity or due to, you know, restrictions like dyslexia or that sort of thing, autism, it's, you know, this sort of thing. So that's sort of what I'm driving at, is the profile of the construction industry, does it predispose people to mental health issues?
We've worked with them literally over the years, especially in the groundwork side of things, would be guys who've done multiple tours of the Middle East over a long period of time, and within 2 weeks of leaving, they're on a dumper with us. I worked with one guy, I ended with a personal chat. He said, I can't work on the 2-ton dumper, and I don't like anyone called Mike. And it was because, I thought, okay, it's a bit personal, but but it turns out that there was Mike and 2 was a call signal in the Middle East on a radio that he was caught up in, and they were his trigger words. And he was and he was a big guy. I didn't argue, I just made sure he was on a bigger dumper. But they were little things, and we've seen it, guys come out of prison who have literally been in problematic lives, the whole thing. They'll come onto construction sites and not be questioned. I've said it before a few times, but we sign off our machinery every day, but we don't actually sign the person operating it off. It's it's crazy in terms of the atmosphere, and we put them into this pressured environment when we don't actually know anything about them. I've got a huge issue with PTSD and the recognition with it in construction. We see it, just the crane driver, like Glenn Edwards last week in Reading. Now he's on TV, we posted it out today about him saying he come off the crane, and I spoke to a few of the guys at Sir Rock McAlpines as well, and they'll have things in place, but that's an extreme version of what he's just seen and come across, and his team has as well, and they're traumatised from that. Are they going to get the right support? Is the correct professional support there? I've had a bit of professional support that I loved, and it taught me a lot of things about what I do and how I go about my life, and it was the decision that changed my life, having a bit of treatment. But unbelievable. But yeah, what do we do? I went on Crossrail. We was there every week. We were stopped going out on track because someone else had jumped, like every week. But not once was I pulled aside and said, "Are you okay?" But we witnessed it once in Hornsey in North London, and every time it happened in East London, you visions that day when it happened. But no one's ever said. Or they said, "Do you want a few days off?" I said, "I can't have a few days off. I don't get paid." So it just carried on, and that's the truth for everyone, unfortunately. So I butted in there.
Jack, go on. You were gonna.
Yeah, so I'm delivering some co-produced suicide prevention workshops over at York College. It's fascinating because I know about Tic Tacs, but I don't know about TikToks. It was 20 years ago, you know, so the pressures for these young apprenticeships that are going into this industry is huge. But before we do the workshops, it's really important that everybody is safe within that. It can be very triggering, it can be traumatising. And certainly for youngsters, we send out a questionnaire beforehand, and some of it's fascinating, the feedback that we're getting. So a lot of these young guys saying that they don't want to speak to a male supervisor. If they're going to speak to someone about the mental health, it has to be female. They're really 5 minutes ago they were in the playground larking around with their friends, and sometimes going into this vocation, it isn't a choice. It's academically, although it's the best industry in terms of if you do well financially. But when you're in the playground and suddenly you're 17 and then it's 5:30 in the morning and you're on site and it's freezing and they see their whole life in front of them, and that's what they're noticing. And it's not that they don't know the help and the support is there within York College. When you go around York College, there's signs saying suicidal thoughts, and when you go to reception on the right-hand side, there's drop-in for counselling. It's not that they don't know it's there, it's that accessibility and the opportunity to attend. So certainly with site managers, being able to speak to them. And one guy was just saying yesterday, he said, the problem is they're asking me questions, but they don't want to hear it because I know they've got enough stress on them. So when they say, how's everything going? Is everything fine? Is everything good? Are you all right? Yeah, good. I'll tick that box. Okay. I'll see you next month. He said, but I'm struggling. So I suppose it's about being as visible as possible. And we've been working with Nestle, and sadly, they lost Ewan, a 19-year-old, to suicide last year. And they just said we have to do something. It was at work. He took his he had a car crash and he was drink driving. He just couldn't tell his parents. So I'm good friends with Neil now, and as I said, I don't want any more friends like that. But what they're doing, they're having to step up, and I think we're at this point now that we can't pretend that it's not a thing, and we are having to step up, and we need to have training, to have real decent training about asking the question, the use of language around suicide. And the more we do that, and this is what they were actually asking about it with the students. They were going, how do I actually ask? What do I actually say? And it was really important for them to know, right, okay, if somebody does ask, this is what I can say, not dismissing it. You're okay, aren't you? You're not going to do anything silly. In fact, are you feeling suicidal? That's an important use of language. And the more visible you become, like your key bar, now it's you're okay. These are small steps that actually we know it's an issue, we know it's a problem, and we're going to do something about it. And these guys, they knew about it. They said it was Barrett students that were there, and they said, we know about it's rammed down our throat about mental health. We see the signs often. And they had these little, which I think are quite good, these little wallets with all the support service that you can get. But they said it's about actual, not just tokenistic, but actually saying you get two volunteering days a year. How are you going to use that? Where are you going to go? How are you going to support your mental health? And then the encouragement for them to talk and open up. That was the difference. And interestingly, afterwards, and I did the evaluation. I said, what more do you want? You know, what's next for you? And they actually said that they didn't want support in counselling, or they knew where they could access that. But what we're hearing now is actually they wanted more training and support on money management, well-being and family well-being. And that's what we've noticed across the board, certainly in the construction industry. And we need to be specific with the construction industry in terms of suicide, why it's different here, what we're hearing. But the Jordan's Legacy did some research on it, and they said actually, it's not people dying by depression or anxiety and taking their own lives. Obviously, you're having a mental health crisis when you take your own life. But then what they're hearing, the majority of the percentages is about money, is about the impact on money, and it is about family issues. And this is what these young students are saying. This is what I want to learn more about. I want to learn about money management. And this is what I'm hearing. That is specific to the construction industry. So I think a lot of research needs to be more isolated, because I'm not in the construction industry, although I'm supporting construction students, and really look into it and asking those questions so people can be honest about it. But I think across here, we could do a poll itself and kind of say, is that the biggest issue? Is finances the biggest issue, and being paid on time? I couldn't imagine being paid 1 day late, let alone 3 months, what you're talking about. It's unbelievable. And this is specifically why people, they feel like they have no choice but to end their own life. So that's something that we can lobby with. That's something I think is really good that we're not just going with a problem, we're going with a solution. We're going, look, Australia, just look at it, come on. And then lobby government, and then that will filter down. And then site managers, contractors, they won't be as stressed or have as much anxiety, so they can support. Everybody wants to be nice and support and talk about well-being and mental health. But when you've got other plates spinning, like literally paying your mortgage, then it's difficult to do. So it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know we all need the basic minimum. We all need to be dressed. We all need to feel healthy. We all need to have food. And then everything else is on top of that. So let's get the basic needs met, which is, gee, come on, it's not an elephant. It's so obvious that get paid on time is, if you're thinking, which you are, which I can see around the room, everybody's nodding when you're saying about payment. That's the biggest thing. So that's what we need to push as an industry, to kind of go, this is a difference. And this, if that's what the future generation are saying, these 20 students who we talk to, if they're saying exactly the same thing, that's what they need. They know where they can access counselling. They know where to go. They know where to go to a GP.
So counselling is a nice thing to have.
Yeah.
But it's not addressing the core issue. I heard a nice story from a colleague about a bricklayer who, on the first day that he takes on apprentices, he shows them how to cook some bacon and make a sandwich, and he shows them that you can buy multi-pack of toilet rolls instead of buying single toilet rolls. And by the end of the day, one smart arse will say, when are we going to learn about bricklaying? And he says, you're no use to me if you don't know how to look after yourself. Yeah. So I think that's for the people who are coming into the profession, being taught life skills, very important. But again, it comes back to the most serious, it seems, so far, is the late payment. Let's move on to the what can we do. Kari, obviously you've had a role in the HSE and Balfour Beatty and Mace, so you've sort of worn a number of different hats in your career. What can we do? What is being done?
So I think, as an industry, we've really looked and focused on the latter part of the, how do we get people help? How do we make people aware of all the helplines? How do we talk to people about it's okay not to be okay? But we really need to drive the sort of front foot now and talk about the preventative element. We've talked a lot about payment terms. We need to look at the kind of long hours and allow people to be a bit more flexible. We need to consider the neurodiversity element of our industry, and we've touched on that. So statistically, we have a higher percentage of people who are neurodiverse in our industry. I can tell you a story of a couple of years ago. My son started his GCSEs. For some of the children in the school who weren't as academic, they were offered the opportunity to go to construction college or to go to hairdressing college. But we're still directing people in our industry who aren't perhaps traditionally academic through that route, which is great, because I think we are a fantastic industry that does embrace all those people. But how do we help and support them better? How do we make sure we communicate with them? How do we teach them some of the basic fundamentals about, finance management and things like that? There's also been some really great research recently around apps and the younger generation. Actually, they are really open to looking at some apps, which can then feed back through their line management, through the subcontractor, through the principal contractor about what they're needing. Because what we're trying to do is look at the lifestyle of the project. And we recognise in that long-working, hard-working pace that we have various phases of a project where there will be natural stressors. So at the start of a project, everyone's really excited, and there's a new piece and a new team coming together. But as that project goes on, it will naturally go through its peaks and troughs. We know about those. We know about the impact of the environment. As the nights draw in, it's cold, it's damp, it's wet. People are more inclined to suffer with their mental health. So let's develop programmes as part of our project life cycle that recognise and reflect those things. And, there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So let's look at the different things that work. Let's set project teams up right. So we are giving them a diverse team who can work together and recognise things. Bringing more women into the industry, bringing more ethnicity into the industry also, I think, really helps create that diverse thinking and perhaps challenge some of the stereotypes that it's not okay to say, I'm not okay. So I think there's lots of kind of facets to it and no silver bullet, sadly. But if we can work together as an industry, that collaboration piece is also key. There is so much going on in our industry, but what we don't want to do is pull in different directions. And that's actually why panels like this are so important, because you've got some fantastic people who are leveraging their skill set to try and improve and create solutions. But let's work together. Let's give an industry picture of all the different ways to do that.
Great, thank you. I think that on our conversation prior to the panel, we talked a little bit about mental first aid courses and how this is a measure by the UK government to sort of monitor impact in terms of how they're addressing the mental health crisis. Would anyone like to sort of talk about that, about what that means practically?
I've got probably upset a few people. My experience of mental first aid has not been good, so we're very much as an organisation not with it. And I know there's a lot of statistics now, what's actually backing that up. But 6 weeks after I'd done the course, 6 years ago, I got it into AMK, was Acon, Murphy's and Kia. And someone on the work site actually gave my number out to someone who wasn't in the industry. And I was at home with my literally 1 week old new boy, and I got a phone call from someone saying, I'm about to take my own life. I've been told you can help me. And I was a dad of 4 days who hadn't slept for 4 days. And then my response was, who are you? What you got my number for? What the bloody hell do you want me to do about it? And I didn't know what to do. And then that was the truth of it. I didn't know what to do. And I was in a position where I was back to the wall. And I had a row with this guy on the phone. And I think I actually snapped it out of him that he realised he wasn't the only person in the world who was suffering. I didn't have a clue what I was doing at home with this newborn. But from that day, my views on it are very different. I'm not to darken the night or anything, but I honestly think it's dangerous. I think we've machine gunned that all over the industry to make that look like the thing to do to fix things. And there are studies out there and reports, I can share them later on, that do say it's not really worked. But I know that upsets a lot of businesses who sell these courses, but
I think it's become quite tokenistic, hasn't it? There's something, there's a problem, we've got to do something about it. I mean, I've been mental health first aid trained and assist trained, but also I think the biggest impact is, in terms of suicide prevention, it's strangers that can make the biggest difference and the biggest impact. And I really do agree with you on that point. But there's this story, and it's trying to give a little bit of hope. There's a story about Johnny Benjamin. You might have seen Johnny Benjamin. And he wrote a book called The Stranger on the Bridge. And he really struggling with his sexuality, and he tried to attempt his life quite a few times. He was in a mental health hospital, and that time he was like, this is the difference. This time I'm going to go to that bridge and I'm going to jump off. And he was there, he was ready to go. And this guy walked past, obviously knew what was going on, and he just sat down next to him. And he just sat down and he was just like listening. He said, I'm just going to listen. And at first, Johnny was annoyed, he was really angry. He was just like, what are you doing? And then he just started talking and offloading like he's never talked before. And then after that conversation, he went back to the hospital and he told them what had happened. And that was a turning point. And it's easy, and they asked Johnny, he said, what was the difference what actually saved your life at that time? And it was the impact that a stranger, undoubtedly another human presence, made. He did it because he didn't have to do it. He did it because it was ultimately the right thing to do. He didn't feel lonely in that point. He gave him real hope that people... So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, in terms of the biggest impact in terms of suicide prevention, what we're seeing is this difference, a stranger, kindness, compassion, love for somebody else, and trust in your gut. So I will tell in the students when they were going... Like one student actually said, I'm worried about my friend because you didn't send me an emoji. I was like, well, that could be a big thing for a 16-year-old who's always send you in emojis. So, like, he always gives me abuse with emojis. And only you know your friends and your colleagues. So really, really do trust your gut. If you haven't heard from them in a while, there's probably a reason if you hear from them. Did they not turn up to footy training the other day? Knock on the door if needs be, because what's the worst that could happen? Well, we know what the worst that could happen. If they get frustrated, or it's difficult to stay frustrated with someone that's showing you compassion. You know, if they get annoyed, and that's often a reason why people don't want to intervene, because, well, what if they actually take their own life? by saying it. But there is no statistic out there by actually saying the word suicide that people actually take their own life. There's just no statistics backing it up. Saying it, it's preventing it, using that word. So if somebody says that to you, that in itself is a preventative measure. That is a good thing because they've been living with that for a long, long time. So don't worry about using a word. Don't worry about terminology. Trust your gut and do something about it. Because you know, I don't know your friends and your family. You know them. So do that. And that's the difference, what I'm learning. But yeah, I do agree with mental health first aid. It does seem tokenistic.
I get the impression that the construction industry isn't that great at genuinely asking people how they are or being sensitive to this. I mean, I've seen a couple of things myself where perhaps if someone flakes out of a job, the immediate response is, oh, they're flaky, not, oh, maybe they're having a bit of a crisis. And Kari, you mentioned before about kind of diversifying the sector. And I don't know if this is sexist of me, but it probably is, but I'm going to say it anyway. But I think that women do bring a different dynamic. And obviously this is a very male-dominated profession. What role do you feel the women have to play? I'm going to direct that to Kara. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh.
In your role as a woman. sorry. But what role do you feel, or how can we diversify the workforce, and how can we bring in a more feminine wisdom to a very masculine environment? Is my question, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question.
Yeah, sorry.
I grew up as a tomboy, by the way, so I'm not really... I often find, because I'm Australian, or I'm a bit younger in my role, probably more, like that's more diverse than the gender, but I like to drink pints and I love sport, so I'm personally probably a little bit different. But I think it's interesting because there was a couple of really challenging meetings recently, and it was quite funny where the client actually said, oh, Kara, we want you in the room. And I was like, oh, I don't really need to be at that meeting. They're like, no, we want you in the room because you'll discharge the egos. And I was like, this is really crazy. Like, I just think that's crazy. But actually, there's just a reality, I think, that, whether it's a societal where maybe men respect women in a certain way, that does change when we're in a room. I don't know. Like, it's just, observations. I think generally, the whole industry needs to really embrace everyone of all walks in life. And I think there's something like people identify in 52 different ways now. So, trying to really get our head around that to make it completely inclusive. But yeah, I think there is definitely a difference there. I guess as a project manager, often when I'm in a room, I'm trying to, get the best out of people and really push people. And that's quite challenging. And I think maybe back to the point about why, as an industry, we've got some of these challenges, is I think we put so much pressure on ourselves. We promise to get something done quicker because we want to win the job. We don't set ourselves up for success in that regard a lot of the time. We've got lots of people out there. A competitor of mine promised a program 6 months quicker than mine, and I lost a job. I think we set ourselves up when I think we should be, as a collective industry, speak with much more conviction. Actually up front, if we take longer with the design and we flush out all the issues, it allows the supply chain to then buy right the first time. Then that takes the pressure off the profit margins, and then when everyone gets to site, it's getting installed in the right program, not rushed, and then not coming back and fixing it. I mean, I don't know how many people have actually been on a project that's been delivered on time in the last 4 or 5 years, and it'd be really great that we set realistic programs to be able to be deliverable in the right way at the right time. And I think taking that pressure off will have a huge impact. But
I think this sort of over-promising, working for free, it's pretty toxic, right? I mean, how can that be addressed? How can you prevent people from undercutting you and then doing a rubbish job? And the project manager may be knowing this, but sort of being forced by having their hand forced to go for the cheapest quote. I mean, how does one How do you legislate against that?
I mean, it's really hard. I mean, I often don't ever recommend the cheapest because often there's a reason why. But yeah, it is hard. I mean, we often have the conversation like, can you ask for a director's discount? Can we do like maybe KPI-led, but the person can't actually really control the final outcome because they're reliant on other people. And I think it is difficult because some of these jobs need everything to be like, I guess, all condensed to actually make them go ahead. But I think, I think we should set examples by just saying, no, that's not acceptable, we shouldn't do that. And if the industry collectively gets behind that and we stand for something. But, that job where that PM came along, I lost that job. And, you have to be willing to go, okay, well, I'm not going to win all of them. And maybe as an industry, if we all get a bit better at that, if we know that we're not going to push the main contractor for an extra percentage, they're not going to push their supply chain, and we just kind of accept that and show the value of actually paying people adequately and on time, we might get a better outcome.
There's a piece around collaboration. So when you're actually, bidding, tendering for work, if you do that collectively, so the principal contractor gets the supply chain involved in that piece, and we realistically come up with what resources are needed, what timeframes needed, that kind of pushing towards a procurement, there is hope that the Building Safety Act will drive some change because of the way that the designs have to be set and approved for sort of high-risk buildings, so actually that will put a lag and a delay in, so you've got to do all the work up front because you don't want that. There's the public sector procurement piece, which says you shouldn't just go on price. So there's lots of multifaceted, but I'm not sure we're there yet. No. The collective piece about the industry and not undercutting one another would be fantastic. There's a lot of work done in other industries around that kind of all-in mentality. So as you aren't working with clients and giving clients that kind of false expectations, I know that we've also lost out or pulled out of work where we just can't deliver a deadline that another contractor's saying they can. But, we will of course try and make it work where we think it's realistic, so it's a challenge.
Are there any scores or measures when bidding for a contract that pertain to how a company looks after its employees, or is it just this is going to cost £300,000? Or I might be being terribly naive, and I'll just go there. But could there be a sustainability criteria, a people criteria, a kind of okay, well we've got this one, they've quoted 300, but this one's 500, but their sustainability value is much higher. They treat their people really well. They make sure they get paid on time. Is that something that's
it's asked for? It is asked.
Yeah.
It gets asked for all the time. We write RFPs, and but then you go the weighting. It's like 95% commercial. Yeah. Or maybe it's 20% team, or unfortunately those things some companies score really well on. Like, yeah, we ask, do you pay your supply chain on time? Mm-hmm. And we take poll checks, but ultimately time, well, it's all about money, right?
When we spoke, Kara, earlier on in the year, it was very much about, because I was saying about the mental health, how we can show is supporting the workforce, but when you go from, obviously, your end, where Kara works and above that, from where the money's coming from, you have to change the sales pitch to, by the way, if we do look after them, you'll make a load more money. And then that's literally, exactly. You have to rebrand it to them, because ultimately they just want to see the numbers. And that's just the world we're in, I suppose. But it's not, there's the moral right thing to do, and how to do it. It's a different world, I suppose. And if you can convert, if we spend 20% on looking after the workforce, we're going to get a X amount of return, then I'm sure their eyes will start lighting up a little bit.
Yeah. Do you want that job to finish? Then let's not push them. Let's keep the right program, but you need to pay them on time. Yeah. How can I go into a room and kick everyone's butt for being late and we haven't paid anyone? Just doesn't happen. It's not funny. It's not fun.
Can I go back to the COVID piece? We learnt loads of things about productivity through COVID, where we didn't just throw lots of kind of resource and people at it. We scheduled work, and I think there's still some lessons from that we haven't kind of grasped as an industry and really embedded. We had to do it for that period, and now we've moved back into kind of how it used to be. So how can we take those lessons back and say some of the productivity levels that we were operating at during that period were extremely high, but not by burning people out, and actually that sense of if you give people shorter shifts and you recognise recognise that they need regular breaks and you look after them, the productivity will actually increase. It sounds counterintuitive, but it's factual, and I think that's our real challenge. But we've got some sites where we offer Saturday working, and we really try not to. But we've had suppliers say, if you don't offer Saturday working, then that team won't want to work on your job. They want to go somewhere else where there is overtime. So it is a real challenge, and you don't want to cause more financial challenge to those individuals. So it's that balance. It's so difficult.
Just saying up the COVID thing as well, it's bang on, because I was fortunate. COVID for myself was busier than ever. I know, especially in the tiling world, it was a very different circumstances, but we all went to was working on the highways at the time, and they closed more roads than ever because they could, and there was so much work going on. But as a team, we all cottoned on to the fact we're very grateful for having this. Don't get up, because they could easily just pull the rug from under our feet. So let's all look after each other. And two, no one hurt yourself, because nobody wants to go to the hospital at the moment. Like, if you go in there, you don't know if you're going to come out, literally. So that was it. So everyone rallied around. And we saw like a real building, bit of team morale, really. And probably going back to the sports stuff and what we push on. But everybody start looking after each other. And I think if you can build that within a team where people look after each other and give people a reason to work together, then you'll deliver. Kia's done one, not Kia's, it was Kia's. They done one years back, apparently, where they had 12-hour working days all the time. And they turned around to everyone and said that we'll pay you 12 hours money to the site staff, but you only have to do 8 hours a day. But we can't have any problems on site, no incidents, no reportable riddles, anything like that. And then they end up delivering ahead of schedule based on just doing 8 hours, because everyone was in it together. But there was commercial reasons, I'm sure, at the end of that, it didn't happen again. Maybe it didn't work, their rights on the paper, but the guys on site loved it. And it worked really well. But it just shows that if you build the morale in the team, you can fly.
For every £1 spent, I think you get £5 in return. Every £1 spent on mental health and mental well-being support, you get £5 return. So that means people are off stress, not off with stress. The impact that you can have to actually invest in that, the return you will get, but it needs to happen right from the top down to the bottom, and that's a difficult thing, isn't it?
Okay, great. So I think we've covered a number of different issues tonight. I think we've talked, the key one is late payment, but there are others. There's regulation around the industry, and the support for the people coming into the industry, counselling sort of at both ends, and what have we just talked about? It's just completely, the bird has flown out of my head.
A bit about neurodiversity, a bit about the hours that people work, and
okay. Trying to legislate for undercutting. So it's a very complicated beast, but it's really good to have the conversation with so many people who it directly affects. So I'd like to thank our panel.
Please.
Well done, us.
Well done. You didn't even lose your name.
We're going to take a 15-minute break, reset the stage, and then Frank is going to join us. So do get a drink. Thank you very much.
Ready to run?
Yeah, I'm ready.